This is the ghost ship story of the Flying Dutchman, and we thought what better time to read this story to you than in the middle of the night, ghost and witching hour. Story of the Flying Dutchman. For days a gale force wind had been blowing, keeping all boats in the harbour. One of the vessels in the harbour was the Flying Dutchman, and its captain was growing impatient. He wanted to start his journey to the West Indies, an important trading route for the Netherlands. The captain cursed. He was a big, robust man, used to giving orders and used to being obeyed, used to following his own path. He did not take kindly to being obstructed by anything or anyone. A great skipper he was, a master of sailing even the roughest of seas. The wildest hurricane was more dear to him than a lazy silence with limp sails. Not surprisingly, resistance to his orders was unheard of. Everybody ran at his orders, cabin boys and helmsmen alike. After all, he was the fastest sailing skipper known in history with next to no accidents, and that was a true feat in the old days. For example, his last journey to Java in the Indies was completed in 3 months and 4 days. Other skippers easily took 6 months. But now he found himself sabotaged by the wind for days on end. Fuming, he walked up and down his cabin, his mighty hat set firmly on his broad shoulders. Time and again he went on deck and looked at the thunderous skies and foaming waters. He smelled the wind and he raised his fist to the skies. "I will sail tomorrow," he shouted to the helmsman. It almost seemed as if he was daring the wind, as if he was challenging God in the world. "But tomorrow is Easter Sunday, skipper," the helmsman shouted through the wind at the skipper. To sail on this holy day was unthinkable. Nobody had ever done so. "I will sail when I want to sail," the skipper snarled as he gave the helmsman a thunderous look. "Not on this day of the Lord," the helmsman mumbled. Although the skipper did not understand a word the helmsman mumbled, he nevertheless fully understood what the helmsman had mumbled. "I will sail when I want to sail, you hear me?" he shouted. The helmsman grew silent and went below deck. The captain thought the better of following him, and instead remained on deck, eyeballing the storm clouds and the foaming water. He despised them. Having lost 4 valuable days of sailing already made him angry, but what really made him mad as hell was the fact that he apparently was not in charge. Rather than him, the storm seemed to have taken charge, or maybe an even greater power, a power that ruled the storms and the waves. He was not about to bear a power greater than his own, to concede that he was maybe not the master of the seas. That night he slept like a baby. At the break of dawn he called all men on deck. "We sail," he ordered, and purposefully ignored the questioning looks of his crew and especially of the helmsman. "Aye, we will sail, skipper," the helmsman conceded. As the crew prepared the ship, the church bells called for Easter Mass. The crew fell silent. The church called on them, and the skipper called on them. The skipper shouted them back to work. The captain of a neighbouring vessel warned the skipper not to sail on Easter, for he might invite evil by doing so. The skipper happily ignored this, and all other warnings shouted at him. He would sail today, and this he shouted back at the other vessels. "I will sail today, even if I would have to sail until eternity. I will sail!" And he sent these very words in the wind to the crews of the other ships in the harbour. And as he did so, the skipper changed. His men looked up and saw a waxen face with deep dark eyes, looking as if death had come upon him. Whilst looking at the skipper, they felt themselves a change, as if death had come upon the entire crew. The thunderous wind blew through the sails. The church bells rang and the sails billowed against the wind. "Look at that! No, it can't be true!" People crowded on the dock, rubbing their eyes at this phantom sight of sails billowing against the wind. The crowd looked flabbergasted at how both the crew and the skipper seemed to be completely still. The ship sailed out of the harbour onto the foaming open seas. As the ship sailed out of the harbour, the hearts of the crowd on the dock suddenly grew cold. As the ship sailed, the sails blazed with a deep red colour as the sky around the ship seemed to darken to the deepest black they had ever seen. Was the red caused by rays of sun? There was no sun. There had been no sun for days. And as far as they could see, there was no fire on board the ship. But all the same, the sails blazed a deep red. And so the Flying Dutchman sailed, with a crew of living dead on board, deep red sails billowing against the thundering storm, watched by a terrified crowd on the docks. The Flying Dutchman never reached the Indies and never entered another harbour. No message reached the wives and the children waiting and hoping for a word in the Netherlands. Now in the old days this happened more often. A great many ships that sailed never reached their destiny. Many shipwrecked in distant unknown places without survivors. But the Flying Dutchman was seen again. One day, many years since the Flying Dutchman left the harbour on Easter Day, an old sailor aboard another ship sailing for the Indies via the Cape of Good Hope looked up and saw an old black vessel seemingly coming out of thunderous clouds on the port side of his ship. It was coming fast, red sails billowing against the wind. More sailors on deck saw it. "Ghost ship! A ghost ship!" they screamed, hairs rising on their backs. A seagull seemed to fly around the mast of the black ship with the red sails. The captain bellowed at the crew, "Get your lazy asses back to work or I'll have you whipped! What are you staring at? Back to work, now!" He ignored the shouts of the men that they had seen a ghost ship. The next day a thunderous storm drove the ship to the shore until it eventually crashed on the shores. Only a handful of crewmen survived to tell the tale of the ghost ship they had seen. Over the decades and centuries, more crews were said to have seen the black ship with the red sails, the viewing of which always foreboded a disaster happening to the ship of the crew, and so very few lived to tell the tale. To this day, it is said that to witness the Flying Dutchman is to run into serious accidents. It is said that every 7 years the Flying Dutchman is allowed to anchor into a harbour. Then the anchor chains rattle and people hear a hollow voice calling. If someone responds, the hollow voice calls again, "I have letters." A hand then appears and hands over letters. Letters addressed to strange addresses, to people long ago deceased. Should you ever get one, please nail it to your mast, or otherwise harm will come to you and your ship. But recently the Flying Dutchman has not been seen. Reports seem to have ceased. Maybe the ship and its crew have finally found their peace? Or maybe the Flying Dutchman is truly sailing for all eternity, and recently no one has simply lived to tell the tale of the encounter. Maybe it is simply destined to sail for all eternity to the ends of the world.